So we're not going to talk about all of the viral families that are in the book. I tried to carefully curate the types of viruses that you might most commonly see in the clinic or in, the laboratory setting. And so the first group of viruses we'll talk about are the papillomaviruses. Papillomaviruses are naked, double-stranded DNA viruses, and they are highly associated with transformation, cancer. Papillomaviruses are highly associated with cervical, penile, anal, and cancers of the oral pharynx. There are over 100 types of human papillomaviruses. There are papillomaviruses that infect other animals as well. I just saw a picture of a cow with a bovine papillomavirus. So, they're a relatively prolific family of viruses, but the ones that infect humans tend to only infect humans. There are over 100 types of viruses that are classified into 16 groups. And broadly, we can classify them into two types of infections, either cutaneous infections or infections of like your skin, or mucosal infections. So those of like your mucous membranes. Mucosal human papillomavirus is associated with cervical cancer. This image here gives you a micrograph of what a papillomavirus virion looks like. One of the things to remember with viral classification is that because viruses are not considered living, viruses do not fit on the tree of life, and so we don't talk about them in terms of viral species. So we don't really say species of virus. We'll say type, group, strain, and it's not strand, it's strain. So when you're talking about viral strains, it's viral strains, not viral strands. HPV, human papillomavirus, again, double-stranded DNA virus. It is naked. I'm not going to ask you to remember everything about all of the genetics, but what I do want to point out is it's a relatively small genome, only 8,000 base pairs. They have 2 structural proteins to make the capsid. And then they have a handful of other proteins, E1 through E7, that help with replication of the DNA. They help with transcription, and they help promote growth of the cell. So depending on the strain of virus, they have 7 to 8 early genes and then the 2 late or structural genes. And I mentioned just a second ago that they promote growth of the cell. So why do they promote growth of the cell? Viruses are very interested in promoting growth of a cell because they need all of the cellular growth equipment in order to replicate. If the cell isn't growing, there is no replication machinery. There's no transcription machinery. There's no translation machinery. So viruses have to have a way to either infect actively growing cells or to be able to drive host cell replication. So one of the things that HPV can do is drive host cell replication. When you think about cancer and what cancer is uncontrolled host cell replication. So viruses are often associated with cancer because they can drive excess host cell replication. Or viruses that can drive host cell replication are the ones that are often associated with cancer. Generally, what happens is at some point there will be a break in the DNA, usually right around here, between E1 and E2. And so what can happen is when you have that break, the virus actually doesn't replicate itself anymore, but the host cells keep replicating. And that's when you get transformation or cancer. Depending on which group of HPV we're talking about, they can infect the skin or the mucous membranes. Each type is specific for a certain tissue. So if you have a wart on your finger, that is a cutaneous HPV. It will not cause cervical cancer because it doesn't infect mucous membranes. It only infects cutaneous tissue. So it's really important that you remember that. If a patient comes into you with a wart, they're not going to get cervical cancer unless they also have a different strain of HPV in the cervix. I mentioned that viral replication stimulates cell growth. That leads to the formation of the wart. The specific type of CPE caused by HPV are called koilocytes. These are keratinocytes that have shrunken nuclei. So if you look at a biopsy of a wart, that's what you would see. The process is down here in these basal keratinocytes. You have infection and cell proliferation. So, right, you have continued replication, continued proliferation, and then release of the viral particles from the skin, the very top layers of the skin. Virus is acquired through close contact, infects the epithelial cells of the skin or the mucous membranes. Tissue tropism and disease presentation depend on the papillomavirus type. So again, you're not going to get cutaneous warts on your mucous membranes. The virus will persist in the basal layer and produce virus in the differentiated keratinocytes. Generally, what we see in patients who have cutaneous HPV is a benign outgrowth of cells. That's called a wart. So remember, warts are not cancer. They're just an overgrowth of cells. The virus is able to hide from the immune system, which is why it can persist for a very long period of time. Eventually, if you ever have had a wart, if you haven't had it treated, you'll notice that eventually it does go away, or you can have it treated. But certain types, specifically some of the mucosal types, strains 16 and 18, HPV 16 and HPV 18, are associated with what's called dysplasia, or cells that begin to look different that may become cancerous. And when you do have that tumor cell formation, you can actually detect the genome of HPV integrated into the host cell chromosomes. The high-risk types, the types that are associated with causing cancer or that are oncogenic, there are a few, but the major ones are type 16 and type 18. Nearly all cervical cancers, 99.7% of cervical cancers have human papillomavirus DNA. 70% of those have either type 16 or type 18. So other types can be associated with cancer, but those are the two major ones. The oncogenic mechanism, as I mentioned before, is due to the integration into the host genome. So what happens is you'll have a break in the DNA right here that inactivates E1 and E2. So that prevents viral replication. The other genes still function, especially those that promote growth of the cell, and that leads to uncontrolled cell growth. So specifically E5 makes the cell more susceptible to growth signals. E6 and 7 bind P53 and P105. These are major tumor suppressor genes. So E6 and 7 will prevent the cell from stopping replication. E5 says, hey, look, here's signals that tell us to grow. And E6 and 7 are like, hey, be quiet, stop signals, let's keep growing. So with the development of cancer, what you tend to see is you have the infection in the basal layer. You get what's called a neoplasia. So you have this type of cell that begins to look different. You're still getting some viral production, but not a lot. As you have that integration into the host cell, you get no more viral production because it's completely inactivated. but you're still getting the cell growth, the uncontrolled cell growth, and that is where you have the invasive cancer. Because HPV is a naked virus, it is difficult to inactivate. It can persist on surfaces, and it can resist drying and some detergents. And it can be transmitted on things that are called fomites, so surfaces or towels, inanimate objects. Infection is generally acquired through breaks in the skin, through sexual intercourse, or childbirth, again, depending on the type, cutaneous versus mucosal. Many patients can shed virus without showing symptoms. So you don't necessarily have to have a wart to be shedding the virus. And it's estimated that perhaps HPV is the most prevalent sexually transmitted infection. Again, these are estimates. It's estimated that at least 80 million people, or approximately 1 out of 4 people in the US, is infected with HPV at any given time, and that there are approximately 14 million new infections per year. This doesn't necessarily have to be something that's a lifelong infection. Sometimes people will get like genital warts that will go away and they may never come back. But certain strains can persist in the body and just be spread, and you may never develop warts at all and not know that you've got the virus, and you're just constantly shedding it anyway. HPV is associated with other cancers as well, including oropharyngeal cancers. Approximately 70% of oral pharyngeal cancers are positive for HPV. Greater than 60% of penile cancers, 90% of anal cancers, and 70% of vaginal or vulvar cancers. So this is a very, very potent oncogenic virus. Every year, it is estimated that there are approximately 47,000 HPV-associated cancers in women and 21,000 HPV-associated cancers in men. So men, of course, are going to have the penile cancer. They are not going to have cervical cancer or vaginal cancer, but men are actually mostly overrepresented in the oropharyngeal cancers as well. So typically, that's the type of cancer that you would see more commonly in men. But men and women can both get the anal cancer and the oropharyngeal cancer. And then, of course, women are going to experience the vaginal and vulvar cancers and cervical cancer. In the US, the most recent data I could find was from 2019. There were over 4,100 deaths because of cervical cancer. Now, just because you have HPV doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get cancer. 10% of women with high-risk HPV will develop changes in the cervical cells. And those can be detected by a pap smear, which is why they recommend routine pap smears. Risk factors include multiple sexual partners. The more people that you're having sex with, the more potential there is for the exposure to various sexually transmitted infections, particularly if you're not engaged in safe sexual practices. Smoking, that can lead to the predisposition for oropharyngeal HPV. Genetics, some people just don't have the best genetics when it comes to stopping abnormal cell replication. And of course, immunosuppression. If your immune system can't keep those virally infected cells in control, that can lead to cancer development. What we have here is some of the cutaneous syndromes and the most common papillomaviruses associated with those. And then on the bottom part of the table, you have the mucosal syndromes and the high-risk papillomaviruses associated with those. Generally, in order to diagnose the cervical infection, you're looking for the cytopathologic effects caused by the virus in cervical tissue, and that's diagnosed through a pap smear. You're going to be looking for those coileocytes, those really tight, dense nuclei. You could also be looking for syncytia, giant multinucleated cells. The other way that you might do this is through PCR to detect the viral nucleic acid. It's a very small fragment, so it can be easily sequenced to determine whether or not it's a high-risk type. Warts can be removed, but recurrence is common. The problem is if the treatment doesn't remove all of the infected cells in the basal tissue layer, the virus can recur, leading to more warts. Innate immune stimulators can help. Remember, our innate immune system is really important in helping stop viral infection. There are vaccines available for the most common and high-risk types, especially those that are associated with causing cancer. It is recommended for boys and girls before the onset of sexual activity. So as this vaccine first came out, it was really recommended only for girls. Then they added boys. They do recommend, preteens and early teens before they begin sexual activity. However, breaking news, the FDA has expanded use of the vaccine to adults up to the age of 45. So if you have not gotten an HPV vaccine and you're under the age of 45, perhaps you should consider it to protect yourself from the development of cancer. And that's one of the challenges we see with this particular vaccine specifically, is that there is a lot of misinformation that goes around. So as the healthcare professional, you want to make sure that you're recommending this to your patients because it protects them from developing cancer, not that it leads to promiscuity or early onset of sexual activity. Teenagers are going to be teenagers. They're going to do what they're going to do, regardless of what their parents or any other adult tells them to do. So it's very important that you inform the parents, or if you have older teenagers as patients, that you inform them that it's not to encourage sexual activity, but to protect them from developing cancers that could result later down the line. So, when you have patients who seem a little bit reluctant, those are some of the strategies you want to use in order to encourage vaccination against HPV.